You're absolutely right. Every time I hear that, I think, some of that sounds fake, but it's real. I could throw in a couple extra.
I'm particularly gratified you got my high school in there, which was...
Lovely. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. I'm very excited to talk to you a bit. I know that you're very busy. As Muni analysts, we operate seasonally. So we're between State of the States and before budget. So I'm going to start out with a question right away, which is, given everything that Shannon just introduced about the progress of the state, how do you intend to continue the positive momentum?
Great question. And one of the things I want to say up front is I don't want to ever, and certainly not today, tear my rotator cuff patting ourselves on the back. So while we've made an enormous amount of progress, and I want to talk about that, I also want to be honest with you about the stuff that we're still dealing with. May I step back just to give a 10,000 foot? So just a couple of things about New Jersey, if you haven't been paying close attention. Around 9.3 million residents, so it's the 11th largest state by population. It's about the 9th or 10th largest economy. It is the 4th smallest geographically speaking state. And you combine first and second points, we're far and away the most densely populated state in America. We are proud. When I just got back a short while ago from being overseas, pitching New Jersey in Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. The first two words that come out of my mouth when I'm selling New Jersey are talent and location. Number one public education system in America, some of the great American universities, arguably the best in Princeton, and location second to none. And when you combine location on the Northeast Corridor with density, you've got to be able to move people and things around better than anybody. That's really, in many respects, job number one. And we are, lastly, two other points. We're probably, by many measures, the most diverse state in America, and we take that very seriously. We wear that as a badge of honor. And our economy is overwhelmingly an innovation economy. So while I may die trying to make cars and trucks again in New Jersey, the reality is we dominate spaces like pharmaceutical, bio, life science, tech, telecom, increasingly film, television, digital, I believe ultimately generative AI, offshore wind, the green economy, fintech, sports betting, not just the handle, which is number one in America, but the guts of that industry and the jobs. So that's a quick sense. Back to your very fair, and by the way, thank you for having me. I should have said that to Magni. It means a lot that you all would have me here, and so thank you for that. And I wish I could stay for lunch. I can't. So let's roll the tape back to what we inherited. In many respects, New Jersey had, which by the way, 30, 40 years ago, as you all know better than I, was a AAA bond rated state. It was the state folks looked to, not just as a credit, through a credit lens, but also smart public policy, responsible government, et cetera. Well, we had fallen off the rails over those ensuing decades. By the way, both sides of the aisle guilty as charged. This is not a political observation, but a reality for both sides. So we inherited a state that was in many respects broken. And I say that through the three lenses. It wasn't growing. It was incredibly unequal. The inequalities, particularly across racial lines, ran throughout almost all of the state. And we were really irresponsible. And to give you a sense, you all will know this better than, and I think you all know this, Fitch has got us at a A+, as does Kroll, Moody's A1, S&P straight A. Again, we had been a AAA bond-rated state back in the day. To give you a sense of how long we have been going off the rails, we've gotten, I think, 7 upgrades during our 6 years in office. The last upgrade before that was 2005. The last upgrade before that was 1977. To give you a sense, in the prior administration, 11 downgrades. So by any measure, we were broken. And I'm proud to say there's good news in unfinished business. I wouldn't say bad news. Good news, unfinished business is the way I think about this. Our revenues have grown. If you look at the budget that was in effect when I first put my hand on the Bible to the budget that's in effect today, we've grown from $35 billion to $53 billion. That's 7% a year. The surplus was $408 million, I think, in the last budget signed by my predecessor. Today, it's the budget that we're in the middle of today, $8.3 billion, so over 20-fold increase. We've shrunk a lot of the inequities, although we have a long way to go. And as I mentioned, we've stabilized our credit. But we still have challenges. The inequities journey is unfinished business. You know, when you have the widest white, non-white gap in the criminal justice system of any state in America, even 6 years, you can't flip any light switches. That's one example of a work in progress. We have reinvented our economy in many respects, so there are literally new industries that are I mentioned generative AI, offshore wind, film, television, and digital. Film was invented in Jersey, but we had long ago walked away from it. Sports betting, the green economy, offshore wind, et cetera. So that I feel good about that. We've got several deficits, though, that we have to be honest with, and we're clear-eyed about it. We have, in many respects, fixed NJ Transit through the customer's lens: reliability, safety, confidence, on-time performance. But we now are going to have to tackle what is a growing fiscal challenge, and we're working on solutions there. I'm confident we'll come up with that. We have something called the Transportation Trust Fund, which allows us to invest in our infrastructure at record levels. We have to replenish that. Again, I think there's a solution that we're close to and that we'll arrive at. And then thirdly, just the operating structural deficit. And we went into this knowing this particular fiscal year, knowing that the global economy would be challenging. Inflation, high interest rates. At that point, one full-on war, now two full-on wars, aftermath of the pandemic, supply chain, tail-end issues. So we deliberately said, you know what, we've never approached a surplus of $8.3 billion. So we printed that and knowingly said we're going to run in this difficult time a structurally imbalanced operating budget, but not ever succumbing to what has happened in Washington. I think the last balanced budget in Washington is the mid-90s, as I recall. You can't do that in New Jersey, thank God, and we won't do that. So that's, you know, we're going to have to look at our revenues and we look at our expenditures. Good news is in New Jersey, enormous latitude. One of the big topics that comes up when we sit with the rating agencies, and many of you are in this room, is constitutionally, not me personally, constitutionally most powerful governor's office in the country. So we can, if we had to, pull many levers to get ourselves back into a better structural position. So we're, as you mentioned, Nini, we're looking at this is budget season, and so we are looking at all of our options right now. Huge bull, medium to long term. I can get into that in a minute if you'd like. And an optimist that we'll be able to navigate our way through a lot of external exogenous challenges right now. I promise you I won't give a Castro speech to answer every question.
No, I appreciate it.
If I take my shoe off and bang this table on.
Well, let's touch upon, let's continue with the budget process. We've had a lot of focus as analysts. We look at the process, we look at policies that are in place, and I'm just curious if you are considering any changes of significance to the budget process.
Well, the process itself?
The process itself.
Is Bill Glasgow here? Bill, how are you? Long time, buddy. Bill would like us to do multi-year budgeting, and he and Paul Volcker have been on my ass for even as longer than I've been governor. I don't think that's going to happen, but that doesn't mean I don't think it's a good idea. I just stepped down a few months ago as chair of the National Governors Association. And by the way, I was at the same time chair of the Democratic Governors Association No one had ever done that before, and having done it, I now know why, because you can, one is kumbaya, the other one is we're going to rip your throat out, and you get the emails crossed, you have unintended consequences. But in any event, I say that because with 6 years in and having had that position, I've got a good lens on how budgets are done in other states. And again, to Bill's point, and the late Paul Volcker, who was a good friend, I agree with him, but I don't see it realistically. We largely have a very good process, with one exception, which I'd really like to see changed. And I think the legislative leadership agree with me. I'll present the budget in late February. It's due to be signed on June 30th. In that intervening, and again, I know enough to be dangerous because I've been doing this a while and I've now seen a lot of other states. Those intervening, March, April, May, June, are very robust, open, transparent, back and forth, months of hearings, private deliberations, advocates weighing in. It's a really, really good process for the most part. The part that folks complain about, and rightfully so in my opinion, is that it ends suddenly. So you've got a plus or minus 120-day process, 105 days of which, or 104 or 6, are really robust and open, great back and forth. Everybody's airing things out. You start to begin to figure out where compromises are, all the stuff you would want. But there's an enormous amount that gets done at the last minute. And so I've said for several years I would support, and again, I think the legislative leaders, if they were here, would support as well, some mechanism at the end that there's a minimum, 72 hours to review X or Y, bills getting posted with some window. I suspect that would help you all, although I know that you care mostly about where it lands. But I, in particular, think it would help our residents, advocates, other stakeholders feel like that they had a process that they were really a part of. That's the one big fix I would hope we could change. I don't see it's changing this year, although I would not be opposed to that.
I think you're right. You have many people who consume the budget, and I will say that for Muni analysts, budget season is, I guess, our Super Bowl, where we're going through the documents. We want to understand what this budget means for credit. From a high level, what we're looking for is trying to understand where the flexibility is, because we are very cognizant of the current economic conditions, and there are many states that are facing challenging revenue environments. Where is the flexibility that you're considering as you enter this cycle?
Yeah, I'm not sure I've got news to make, given that we're still building the plane. Our revenues, so far are holding up largely well. April's a huge month, obviously, for obvious reasons. January's a pretty big month because you get a real sense of, you get your first real sense of income tax trends, and you certainly get your first sense of consumption, or not first, but your biggest sense, given you've got the Christmas reality, holiday reality. And we'll see. The news, including in the press today, I believe you all saw, the general American sense of consumption around the holidays is strong. I don't have details enough to give you what that looks like yet in New Jersey. So we'll see, but the levers are significant. By the way, that's now 20 tax cuts. We've done 6 more since my people gave you the propaganda to introduce me, so I apologize. We didn't get that. That would never have happened in the mid-'70s in the Soviet Union. That would have been right on the money. So we're proud of that, and that includes, listen, affordability continues to be, bless you, you get a lot, the good value for money equation is hugely important in New Jersey. So, as opposed to realistically, we're ever going to be the low-cost state to either do business in or raise your family in. Every state's got a bumper sticker. Ours is unquestionably the #1 state in America to raise a family. That's New Jersey. And you think about what goes into that. Well, we fund public education per capita unlike anybody else on the planet. And that's deliberate. That's a cold-blooded decision because we see that not just for our precious kids and how they grow up, but that's a huge element of our economic development. And so affordability is always an issue, but it's within that context. If you're the #1 state in America to raise a family, you've got to have great public education. You've got to have, and we do, top handful of healthcare systems in the world, great infrastructure, particularly our location, great quality of life, and all that goes with that. You know, we are proud that we lead the nation in gun safety, for instance. Freedoms are now increasingly, I talk to CEOs and companies and families all the time, and, you know, even compared to when I got here 6 years ago, you know, what do your reproductive freedom laws look like? What do your LGBTQIA plus protections look like? Gun safety, how do you feel about the environment? And so those are all factor in, and those to some extent run through a budget. But we don't want to lose our mantle. So again, enormous flexibility to a point. Enormous flexibility. So if the roof fell in, our pension payment this year, assuming it'll be full, and I've already previewed that it will be, it's over $7 billion because we're still making up for incredibly irresponsible behavior that went on for 25 years across both sides of the aisle. Had we been making a full pension payment in each of those 25 years, that $7.1-ish billion payment would be just at $1 billion. Think about that. An annual penalty for past malfeasance and irresponsible behavior, both sides of the aisle, $6 billion a year in just pension payments. And I've said this to many of the rating agency folks who are here and their colleagues. While it is not a sacred obligation like a bond would be, and by the way, I think we announced the defeasement, Darrell, today, $500 million more. We're now up to $3.7 billion. I think those savings will be almost $1.4 billion over the lifetime. So we manage our debt portfolio aggressively. We did, I think, the trade of the century in the throes of the pandemic. We borrowed $4 billion at an infinitesimal interest rate and parlayed that into a lot of what we've done since. My only point is a pension obligation is not, you know, I didn't sign an indenture associated with that, but I view it essentially in the same sacred neighborhood. We have to, once again, I think we're getting there. I'm proud of our progress, but still work unfinished business. We have to be, again, the state that people trust. Our residents, all the way from our residents to folks like you in the room. You want to say, you know, whether I like what they're doing or not, it's part of a journey that they have laid out for us from day one. They haven't woken up and gone off the rails. They're doing what they said they would do. Maybe not at the pace we'd like, but we're getting it done. So I could go on and I won't.
I will actually, though, because
You'll go on.
I think it's been a focus of any analyst that has covered this credit closely. For me, it's Chris Hessenthaler. He's my lead analyst on New Jersey. Chris is sitting right up there in the front row.
I can slip Chris a 20 before I leave, just to make sure.
I think this is the point when I say, you know, all of my comments are my own. They do not reflect J.P. Morgan or associated affiliates. Thank you for the disclaimer opportunity. But we've been very focused on the pension challenge and really want to understand how sustainable the path forward is because, as you say, the challenge is great.
Yeah. It's sustainable. If we were here 6 years ago, I would have said it is likely sustainable. We had to climb over a series of years about $1 billion or more per year, more than the prior year. So what I look at, by the way, just in terms of first piece of paper I get, is a best guess sense of revenues, including in this year and projected in out years. What is sort of just what you print plus or minus are going to be consistent with what you've been doing in a bunch of categories on expenses. And then what I call the ups list. What's changing? And so the ups list on the pension payment for several years was up $1 billion. At a point, again, remember what I said earlier, I believe the budget, the last budget my predecessor signed, I say that because it's in the middle of that budget that I put my hand on the Bible. Surplus $408 million. The budget I just signed on June 30th, $8.3 billion. And so roll the tape back. When you've only got $408 million of surplus and you're up on the pension fund alone, never mind you're up on school funding. We didn't allow the school funding formula before I got here to be implemented. So now we're in year 7 coming up. I'm happy to say that's going to be the final big up. But the pension up this year, it's going to be 50 to 75 million, I think. So it's sort of a rounding error. So you've gone from when we were putting $4 billion in, then 5, then 6, and then we got to the mountaintop. That up, it's a big number, but the up went from $1 billion to less than $100 million. School funding is still going to be a multi-hundred million up. That's going to be the biggest up that we'll have in the budget, and that's been the case other than prior to getting to the mountaintop on the pension, that would have been the biggest up. But school funding has been up $500 to $700 million a year now for every year I've been here. That will ultimately reach its mountaintop with the budget that I'll be announcing. So, short answer, I feel very good about the pension payment going forward.
Got it. Occasionally when we talk in the investment community, we're asked what our favorite bond is. I think we know your answer already, but I will ask you what your capital spending priorities are.
My favorite bond?
It's New Jersey. We understand.
I put the indenture under my pillow at night. Capital spending. The big one, although the feds are playing an enormous role, is the Hudson River Tunnel project, which is either called that or Gateway. That's finally happening, thank God. But that's the biggest infrastructure project in the United States right now, and I suspect it will be for the next 10 or 12 years. But again, could not have asked for more support from the feds on that, and I think the details of that are all public and well known. School construction will continue to be a big priority. When you're the #1 public education system in America, you better damn well have good schools. Infrastructure investment at record levels, but again, assuming we get the Transportation Trust Fund settled, which I'm highly optimistic we will, that'll be spoken for, which is a good thing. And I'd say lastly, these are not mega items, but they have enormous impact in the economy going forward. And if I could riff on that for 1 minute. And that is, we are placing bets on a series of innovation hubs. The most recent one we've announced, although the Economic Development Authority has not said on that one specifically how much it will put to work, but we typically put $20 to $25 million to work on these innovation hubs. The most recent one is a generative AI joint venture with Princeton University, which we think has enormous potential. The Helix in New Brunswick, which has much more of a life sciences angle, although Bell Labs a few weeks ago announced they looked around the entire country. New Jersey won, and they're going to move from Murray Hill into New Brunswick over the next number of years. Something called SciTech City in Jersey City, associated with Liberty Science Center. We will have a FinTech hub, I think, to be announced soon. We're cooking up a applied, when you say plasma physics, at least I think, you think of nuclear reactors. But there's sort of this is pejorative, and I don't mean it to be, this sort of a low-end version of that, applied plasma physics. That's another area that we're focused on. We have the Wind Energy Institute. So I think our Board of Public Utilities next week is going to announce a big solicitation. So those all have to a greater or lesser extent, capital associated with them. And the reason the RIF is very simply this. One of our objectives, other than grow stronger, fairer, responsible, which are the three legs of the stool from day one, grow the economy, shrink inequities, be a state that people could trust again. Remember I said we started at $35 billion of revenues in that first budget that was signed by Governor Christie, and we're in this budget that we're in now, we're plus or minus $53 billion. One other way to think of that is going forward through economic cycles, good and bad, our objective is to meaningfully outperform that point in the cycle relative to how we performed in the past. So I'm not naive enough to think that the $35 billion of revenue in the fiscal year 2018 budget could be automatically a $53 billion experience if the exact same economic circumstances took place. But our sort of walking around back of the pocket hope is that economy produces 10 to 20% more revenue than it did when we lived through it. Does that make sense to you all? So that a $35 billion revenue economy really looks more like a $40 billion revenue economy, et cetera. And I think we've got the pieces in place for that to happen. I think I'm getting the hook, am I?
Well, we're coming close. So I'll give you one more, which I've personally been curious about. You've spoken a bit today about what you inherited and the success that you have achieved so far and unfinished business. And so I guess my question for you is, what advice would you give to your eventual successor to keep it going?
Very good question. And by the way, it's not at all clear who that's going to be. It's going to be a crowded field of Democrats and a crowded field of Republicans. And for the most part, the names that, how many folks live in Jersey? I should have asked you that. Okay, bless you all. For the most part, by the way, part of the reason why that economy that generated $35 billion, our hope is generates revenues that are sort of 10 to 20% more than that, is not just a reconfiguring of the economy, including old stuff. We now manufacture a lot more than we did 6 years ago. CNBC, by the way, should get this off my chest, not necessarily a home game for me. CNBC rated us last year as the #1 improved state for business climate in America. But the other reason is, I thought of this when you all raised your hands, we have a lot more bodies in New Jersey than we did 6 years ago. It's partly pandemic. And by the way, we root unequivocally for New York City's success because a lot of people live in central and northern Jersey because of a nexus to New York. But the reality is COVID contributed to that. Affordability has certainly contributed to that. Median house price, single-family home in New Jersey is $525,000 today. I think in Brooklyn that's probably double, I believe, over $1 million. I was about to say over $1 billion. So let me go back to this. So we're trying to draw a line under past bad habits. That would probably be job number one. So you make the damn pension payment. You should be reducing indebtedness or managing, defeasing, preventing. We have a fund in addition to our surplus called the Debt Defeasance and Prevention Fund, which still has some money in the tank that allows us to be opportunistic or fund stuff right off the balance sheet. So for this room in particular, draw a line under or over, I guess, the bad habits of the past, and just that's take it as a given. And what happened 30 to 35 years ago, bad habits became the norm in New Jersey. So they were accepted practice. And it's, in other words, when you went from one governor to another, the political party mattered less than, hey, if he did it or she did it, I can do it. And we came in, again, we're not holier than thou. We still have challenges. Our work is not done. I'm not patting myself on the back, but we came in committed, if nothing else, we were going to draw a line and say, you know what, this will be different. So far, for the most part, it has been. But again, we still have work to do.
Thank you, Governor Murphy.
Thank
The
you.
hook is here. We're going to keep you on schedule.